in my relationship, right? Seeing how I play God in my relationships and God in my own life, right? Because I got to get to this place where I see that playing God doesn't work. It says on the bottom of 62, it says, most good ideas are simple, right? I made it pretty simple, right? Breaking it down into those 3 questions makes the third step pretty simple. And this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we passed to freedom. Because we're building this spiritual arch. I pointed out the base of that arch is the powerful cement which binds us that it talks about on page 17. The cornerstone of our willingness to believe that there is a God that would work in our life. Right? And now it's talking about this concept as being the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. Now, I look at a concept like a concept car. It isn't necessarily a car that you can go out and buy, but it might be a car that you can get in the future. Right? It's a vision of what a car could possibly look like. Well, they're talking about the concept of a spiritual way of life. Not necessarily one that I have, right? But one that hopefully I could have in the future. And a keystone is like the center stone in an arch, in a stone arch, right? And it supports all the weight of the arch, all the stones that are on each side of it. And I like to picture this arch over a doorway. And we're going to walk through that doorway into this new way of life. And the way we do that is by working the rest of the steps. And that's the process of walking through this arch to this new way of life. At this point, I like to jump ahead, and it's really the only place in the book that I do jump ahead, except for in step 1 when we go to page 52. But I like to look at what is that vision, what does that concept of that new way of life look like? And go to page 87. The bottom of page 87 in the 11th step, this is my spiritual practice. This is my spiritual way of life. As I go through the day, I'll pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. It's because I trust that God will provide what I need if I turn to Him. In the 3rd step, it's just a decision. In the 11th step, it's a practice. It's part of my spiritual practice. Pausing through the day and turning to God. I constantly remind myself I'm no longer running the show. Right? God's directing my life now. In the 3rd step, it's just a decision. In the 11th step, it's a way of life. It's a practice. Humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, Thy will be done. What would God have me be? To you? To myself? Right? That's the principal and agent relationship. Again, it was just a decision in the 3rd step. But that's this concept of this new way to live, and that's what I'm deciding into. So, the bottom of 63 is where the 4th step starts. It says, next we launched out in a course of vigorous action. Now, look at the words it's using here. Launched out. Vigorous action. All right? The first step of which is a personal house cleaning. That kind of suggests that we're supposed to jump into this thing. One of the things that you're going to understand, probably at a little deeper level. Certainly the first 3 steps were designed to keep taking you down another notch. That self-reliance can't work, but I need to find this reliance in a power greater than myself. Well, now the 4th step's going to lay out this blueprint of my life run on self-will and what that looks like. So it's going to take me down some more notches, chip away at some more of the idea that Dan doesn't need God. And again, this is not about me feeling good. It's going to tell me why I write inventory. On the next page, on 64, where it says, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, this is the top paragraph, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. And that's a great prayer. God, please help me face and be rid of the things in myself that are blocking me from you, other people, and myself. I just wanted to mention this. I know that a lot of people are taking notes. I have all my notes written down in a guidebook, and if there's any interest in that, it's easy to get. And also, I'm going to be talking about the 4th step, and it could start to feel like a math class, right? Starting to talk about, because I get really into how each part relates to each part, and you might walk out of here blinking your eyes crazily. I don't know, but I have actually. If you go to this to the internet, you can actually download some examples of this. There's no charge for it. Just if you type in this URL, if you go to bigbookawakening.com/step4.pdf, it should open right up for you if you've got a Adobe Acrobat, which comes on most computers these days. Right? It should just pop open. Yeah, bigbookawakening.com, no spaces in between that. / that's where the top leans to the right. Right. Then all lowercase step and then the number 4.pdf. And that's like a direct link to that one file. And it'll should pop right open for you, or download into your computer, one of the two.
You brought some books. Are you going to have any extra or not?
I probably won't. I didn't bring very many. I just brought a couple.
Okay.
Right.
And you can buy those online too.
Yes, you can. Yeah. But basically, it walks you through at a deeper level all the things I'm talking about. So, okay, where are we? Now, a lot of people approach this thinking that the 4 steps going to make you feel better, right? The better you feel, the less you need God. Let's be honest, right? Right? This would not be as effective if it makes you feel better. It doesn't mean that when you have God in your life that you're not going to feel good, right? But I go through this thing where, and I think it's somewhat normal, right? That that it's desperation that gets me to God, and I say that over and over again because it was true in the beginning and it's true today. It's the things that I feel the most desperate about that drive me back to that source of power. In fact, I want to read something, if I can find it. In There Is a Solution, page 25, where it says, there is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of our shortcomings, which this process requires for its successful consummation. Underline, almost none of us like. If you liked it, you're not going to be looking at things that are going to drive you to God. You're going to have to look at things and find the things that you find objectionable about your behavior. Right? And it's that behavior that you don't like about yourself that is going to get you to that power. right? So I don't write inventory. I don't write inventory just to seek comfort. I write inventory to face and be rid of the things in myself that are blocking me from God, other people, and myself. Okay. So, okay, let me see. I don't want to read it. I just don't want to read to you. I want to pick up the parts where I can just discuss with you the high points. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Right? A spiritual life that takes no regular inventory, you can go spiritually broke. Okay? Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. Spiritual inventory is a fact-finding, fact-facing process. It's an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. Right? One object is disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, right? Or to disclose where I fall short, to get rid of these promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he can't fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly, searching out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure, and being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, with what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. Common manifestations of self are selfishness, self-seeking, dishonesty, fear, the way I treat people in relationships, right? Sex. So it's important here to look at the idea is that I can't fool myself about the value of hanging on to these resentments. Right? Holding a resentment towards somebody else is like me taking poison and hoping you die. Right? That person might not even know that I'm resentful at them. Right? The thing is that resentment separates me from a spiritual place. Anger completely blocks me off from being in a place of comfort. Right? At least the way I've been living it, or doing anger. Today I just look at anger as a vehicle to get closer to God. Right? So I can't fool myself about the value of hanging on to a resentment. Right? It says resentment is the number one offender. Not alcohol, it says resentment. Resentment destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From resentment stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. Now, here's a really important point that there's talking about here. It says when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Right? And that's what we talked about in step 1. The unmanageability of my spiritual condition sets up the condition conducive for the insanity, that mental obsessions to return, and the physical problem comes back. I drink again, and I lose control, and I get consequences in my life. Right? So here it's saying exactly that. If the spiritual malady is overcome, you're going to straighten out mentally and physically. If the spiritual malady is never overcome, well, then you won't. You won't straighten out mentally and physically. And I think that's a big part of a lot of the therapeutic parts of Alcoholics Anonymous is that it never gets into the spiritual side in some areas. And I have to see that this is a spiritual program and I have a spiritual solution. So in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. So, the first instruction that I give the people that I work with, and it's immediately after we say the third step prayer. Before they leave, we start a list, and I send them home to make that list and to give it some thought. And I actually don't only work with people one-on-one, I also do a lot of groups, where a dozen people in a room or 20 people in a room. And one of the biggest problems was getting everybody through together. And I found that giving it to them in little pieces seemed to help in a number of different ways. If someone was dragging behind, it gave them time to catch up because we're moving so slow through it. The other thing was I found that a lot of people don't take responsibility for their own spiritual practice, their own spiritual growth. You give them the whole instructions, say, call me when you're done, and then you don't see them. You meet every week up until this point, and there's a momentum that builds, and if you give them a little piece at a time, that momentum keeps them moving forward. So I find it really helpful to do this a piece at a time. This is not the easiest inventory that I'm going to talk about today, but it's going to change your life if you try it. I can guarantee that. All right? So first I give them a list. I tell them to make a list of the people, principles, and institutions with whom they're angry at. Now, sometimes I work with guys that'll come to me and say, well, I'm not angry at anybody. I have no resentments. Right? And the people that come to my mind, they're the tall, long hair, very self-driven, self-willed guys. I'm not angry at anybody. And it's like, yes, because you're too selfish to give anybody that kind of credit or energy to be angry at them. Just make a list of the people who bother you, and then the list looks exactly the same as the next guys because they have tons of people that bother them, but they're not going to give them the enough energy to actually say, I'm resentful at you. Right? But they tend to be bothered by plenty of people. When I work one-on-one with people, I don't limit it. But when I'm doing a group, it has a large variation of people. Sometimes people that are new, sometimes people that have written inventory, sometimes people that have never written inventory. But I want to move them through as a group. So I tell them, pick the 20 to 30 grosser handicaps, is what I call, to pull a word out of the book, the grosser resentments. Because that way they at least learn how to do this, and they can continue to write inventory forever, because inventory is a spiritual tool. And it's not something that I ever necessarily am going to stop writing, and it's something that this inventory is something that I actually have gotten better at the more I've done it and the more I've taught it. So, and one of the important things about that is the better I am at seeing the truth about a situation and identifying the things that I need to see in it, the quicker I get to the solution of that situation and the less time I spend in it. Or sometimes I don't even fall into it because I understand what's going on around me. Right? So there's an experience that has to happen from this that that we'll talk about actually later in the 10th step. Because this is about learning basically how I can turn out of these things that are blocking me from God. Right? So I tell them to make a list. Just come back next week with it done. Then we talk about the second column. Now, the book never refers to actual columns. But there is this chart in the book. People have picked up the word columns and the cause of the resentment. And if you look in the book on page 65, it gives some examples, like his attention to my wife, told my wife, I'm sorry, I should start at the beginning. Mr. Brown, his attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress. Brown may get my job at the office. All right? That's basically how I tell them to list them. 1, Mr. Brown. A, his attention to my wife. B, told my wife of my mistress. C, Brown might get my job at the office. We got some paperwork here. Just want to see what kind of inventory I have. What I found really helpful, though, is to pray into that list and ask myself, what's underneath all of those resentments? What's really driving that resentment? And I used everything I've wrote down here to kind of get clear on it. If you start, just plenty of times you'll see someone that's, when they start putting names down like their mother or father or husband or wife or boyfriend, where there'll be 20 causes of the resentment. The more causes to the resentment is the more I'm trying to validate to you my right to hang on to this resentment. Because the more I can list in my mind, then the more I have a right to be mad. Right? But remember what it said in the page before, it's just not to fool ourselves about the value of holding on to these resentments. I pray into that list and I ask myself, what am I really angry at here? Usually I could come up with one sentence that covers the whole list. Right? Because I will have them write a separate page on each one of those things they come up with. So it's to their benefit to come up with the bottom line here, right? And they'll end up writing a lot less in the long run. And I don't believe that the amount you write is necessarily more beneficial. It's not about how many you write, it's about getting clear. And it becomes an incredible spiritual exercise to look at all of these things that I'm angry about with you and just ask, what am I really angry at? What's underneath all of that? And just look at that. Right? So we take that list and I say come back with that done next week. Giving them a piece at a time, there's no reason why they can't have it done. I've had people with 100 resentments have it all done by the following week. And I've given people all the instructions and I don't see them for a year. Right? That's the difference. Okay? Then it affects my sex relations, self-esteem, all these things that are next to that stuff on the list here. Well, there's 7 things that are actually mentioned in this area of the book. That's self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. Right? Those are all things that are listed here. And see, the chart here only gives me the first 2 columns. Right? And it gives me some lists of what it affects next to it with fear bracketed alongside of it. But it doesn't tell me what those are. A lot of people look at this and say, this is the whole inventory. Right? And I've tried those checkbox inventories where you just check little boxes and say, yeah. Right? And it felt really good that I finished it. But the trouble was nothing really changed. I had a lot of comfort because I felt like I accomplished finishing my 4-step, right? But nothing really changed in my attitude towards the people, towards the situation, right? The value of this done like I'm talking about here makes what Carl Jung says earlier in the book just jump out. On page 27, here's what Carl Jung told Roland Hazard. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena, meaning he saw these spiritual experiences, but he couldn't explain why. Again, doctors really aren't trained in spiritual situations and spiritual matters of the spirit. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. In other words, everything seems to change. Right? Now, here's what you're going to see in the inventory. In the in this third column, I'm going to look at my ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces in my life. That's what I'm going to see in this third column. Right? And in the fourth column, what I'm going to see is what it goes on to say. These things are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. That's what the fourth column is going to give me, a new set of conceptions and motives. Right? That if I practice this way of life, those will begin to dominate me rather than the things in the third column. That's what Carl Jung says our spiritual experience looks like. They didn't know how to give it to us. Right? And we're going to talk about that right now. So, I look at this as just, as I said, the first two columns. So the next paragraph below this chart on 65 says, we went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. Checkboxes didn't give me thoroughness and honesty. Right? Don't get me wrong. A lot of people use them, and it helps a lot of people. But it didn't take me to where something that took more consideration got me. As I said in the beginning, I had 5 sponsors in my first year. The first 4 gave me different types of inventories. I had a questionnaire that I answered the ones that I thought applied, and I ignored the ones that I figured didn't. Somebody else gave me an autobiographical pass through it where I wrote a bunch of stuff that I already knew. Again, it just looked like I was trying to validate my reasons to be resentful to the person that was going to read it. Never gave me any new attitude or new information. And I did the checkbox inventory, so I have personal experience with it. Right? Again, I felt really good that I finished my inventory, but no new attitude, no new conceptions, nothing that I needed to get to move on from here. Right? But then it goes on to say, is when we were finished, right, with the first 2 columns here, it says we considered it carefully. Right? So how can you consider something carefully? There's 2 ways. Once you can talk about it. That's one way. The second way is to write it down. And if you're going to read it to someone later, writing it down makes a lot of sense. So some of you might have heard of an extended third column, and that's the validation for the extended third column. Because next to these 7 areas of self, we're going to write how they affect us. All right? So, I have an example. Microphone. I'm going to write the notes, and then I'll come back here to explain them. Oh, maybe I could just move this closer.
With difficulty.
Pardon me? No, I was going to move the board. I was going to move the board.
This board?
Yes, I'll move that board.
Very proactive about any of that stuff.
Can everybody see that?
Maybe a little this edge over here.
There you go. All right. Rough. All right. Here we go. I'm going to write that down. Lori, my first wife, left me when I needed her most. I had just gotten, I was still drinking, and it became convenient for her to move back in after I'd gotten sober, because she needed to make a change in where she was living, and she needed to, plus we thought we would see what would happen if we got back together and see if it would work again. Well, she moved in when I had about 3 months sober. At about 6 months sober, she moved out. So Lori left me when I needed her most. So here's another place that I found really helpful to give people pieces of it, because it can get a little overwhelming with this third column. So we're going to just do 2 things at a time. The self-esteem and pride. So I'll write that first. You know what? I'm just going to write the headings and talk about the rest. I'm not used to writing on a board, and it's just going to get worse as we get down to the bottom. Self-esteem. Now, in order to get some focus here, we've defined how we approach each part of it, and it holds me to a method. And I know some people don't like the word method or mechanics, but it's a great teaching tool, because what we're trying to learn is how to do this and to do it effectively. And what I found is taking it in bite-sized pieces will give us a focus that will keep it to this certain format that is proven more effective. So self-esteem is the role that I've assigned myself here. Who am I? Right? Remember, Bill, there's no, between the third step and the fourth step, it doesn't change chapters. He's talking about the actor trying to be the director, right? Well, self-esteem is the role I've assigned myself here in my little play. And the role I've assigned myself here in the marriage was I'm the best husband she could get. Right? You could say, well, I don't have high self-esteem. I didn't think I was the best husband she could get. But see, if I thought I was the worst husband that she could have had, then when she left, I would have been mad at myself. Right? Because I would have figured that she was going to leave anyway. But my self-esteem says nobody could leave me. Right? Now, notice in this chart here that it has fear bracketed alongside. Let me just put something bigger here to mark my page so I can go back to it. All right. So it's good to jump ahead to look at what the instruction is for the fears. It says on last paragraph on 67, it says, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulty. Self-esteem and pride are not my difficulties. Those are the things that I need to get back. My difficulty is what I write down, how it affects me. How was my self-esteem affected? So, self-esteem was, I'm the best husband that she could get. Right? Or want. Right? So to bracket my fear alongside of that, the difficulty that I have with self-esteem, right? I just look at what that statement that I just said, and it's like, well, maybe I wasn't good enough. Right? Maybe that was really the issue. That's my fear. Whereas I write next to self-esteem, I am the best husband she could get. The fear bracketed alongside of it was not good enough. All right. The second one here is pride. Pride is the role I've assigned Lori, the role I've assigned you, and how you're supposed to look and interact with me, how you're supposed to see me, feel about me. Right? Now, the role I've assigned her, Lori, in this marriage is that no one should think I'm not worth staying with. Right? And the fear that I bracketed alongside that was worthless. Right? If I'm not worth staying with, then that fear is that I'm worthless. Right? So I use what I'm writing here to give me the fear. I'm not just going into my head to get the fear. I'm using what I'm writing next to these to show me what my fears are. Right? So this is the role I've assigned me, and this is the role I've assigned Lori and how she's supposed to interact with me. The next two are Might run out of room. Ambition and security. Ambition is what I want out here. Security is what I need in here, right? So what did I want from Lori? I wanted to be loved, right? But my fear was that I wasn't. She left me when I needed her most, right? I wanted to be wanted. My fear was that I wasn't wanted, that not wanted. Right? That was my ambition. Now, the template for this is on that URL that I just shared with you before, the Step 4 PDF. And so if you wanted to look at this closer, you certainly can. And that also gives a bunch of examples. So that was at bigbookawakening.com/step4pdf. Okay. So that's my ambition. That's what I want out here. And what I needed inside here is I need to be not abandoned to be okay. Right? So the fear here was that I was abandoned. The fear of being abandoned. So these two I've given the person I'm working with after the week following this. I give them self-esteem and pride. Go home and do them, and they come back. I give them ambition and security the next week. Go home and finish them, or call me as soon as they're done, and I'll give you the next instruction, however you want to work that. Right? In a workshop, if they haven't finished this, and you're explaining this, there isn't too much work for them to catch up. Right? But workshops are good from this perspective, is you can manipulate them with the pressure from the group. Like you don't want to keep the group back. You don't want to be the one that makes this thing die. But people can be more accountable to a group than they will be for their own spiritual growth. So I found that to be really helpful. Not everybody needs that. Some are hungry enough to have it and be motivated. But it hasn't. It's helped some people that normally wouldn't finish an inventory get through one. But then there's the others that are impossible, but that's another story. But look at this. This is what I need inside. And to get what I need inside, Lori had to do certain things out here between us. In order for her to do certain things out here, she had to live up to the role that I've assigned her and how she's supposed to interact with me in the role I've assigned myself. And I send them home after explaining all this stuff, and they finish all those, and then I come back and I give them the following 3: personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. You can see I'm not used to writing on one of these boards. Okay, I give them the last 3. Send them after they've done ambition and security. I give them instructions for the last 3: personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. Personal relationships are my deep-seated beliefs on how the relationship is supposed to look. Remember, I'm the director here, and I'm directing the show, and this is the way a relationship is supposed to look. And that comes from wherever, the people and experiences that I've had growing up, the examples I've had in my life. I have these deep-seated beliefs of the way this relationship with Lori was supposed to look. So what came off the end of my pen was, wives never leave their husbands no matter what they do. Right? And the fear was that I'd be alone. Then there was sex relations. And I look at sex relations because there's a complete separate sex inventory. So I look at sex relations from the perspective of what is a real man in this relationship. right? Because this is not about Lori. This is my inventory, not hers, right? So what is a man in this relationship? A real man commands the respect of their wife. Commands the respect of their wives. Right, men? The fear is that I'm not respected. Right? And then pocketbook. No one should disregard the value of my financial support. So the fear is not valued. Again, the fears come from what I write in the third column. The process shows me the fears. So, let's look at this. In sex relations, this is what a real man is. And I'm putting that real man into this personal relationship with my wife. And this is the way that relationship is supposed to look like between that real man and my wife, Lori. And in that relationship, there's certain things I need in here to be okay with what's going on. That's my security. And based on what I need in here, these are the things I want to happen between us while we're interacting. And in order to get that from her, I've assigned her a role in my little play here and me a role in my play. Right? So, this is starting to pull me down into this place where I see that all of these fears that are bracketed alongside the difficulties that I've written are really, it's proving what it says on that paragraph in 62. This is selfishness and self-centeredness driven by 100 forms of fear. Right? And here's the fear. And we're going to look at some of the other stuff on the next part. So let me just check my timing here. 11:45. Okay. Any questions on this so far? I know, it feels like a math lecture. Again, doing this is how you learn it, not listening to someone talk about it. Question? The fear for sex relations? Sex relations was a real man commands the respect of their wife. So the fear is taken right out of what I wrote, not respected. See, if I didn't have that fear, I'd be neutral to the resentment. But we'll get back to that in the fears. So, I get all this down, and then it takes me to this, we get to this part in the book that, the bottom of 66, where it says, we turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. The key to the future would be pretty important to have, wouldn't it? We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people had really dominated us in that state. The wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, doesn't mean if it was true or not. It still hurt us. It still affected us. It had the power to kill because it separates me from a spiritual place. How long does it take for a resentment to separate you from a good place? Right? Not long, right? Boom, it's gone. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So the key to my future is being at a place where I could master my resentments. Would that be a good place to be in? I think so. This was our course, so it's going to tell us how to do it. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. So, if the key to my future is being able to see this. If this was the course I'm going to have to take, I have to understand what does it mean by they like myself are sick too. And the only thing I have to go on really, and to keep some focus to this, is what I've written so far. So if Lori was sick like I am, that means that I would do the things that Lori does. So I go back to the first column and the cause of the resentment. She left me when I was just getting sober and needed her most. So I asked myself, how have I done the things in column 1 to the person in column 2 and or others? How have I done the things in column 1 to the person in column... how have I done the things in column 2 to the person in column 1 or others? And not did I do, but how did I do them? Right? Because if I'm spiritually sick like she does, that means that I've done those things to her or other people. So I look at the statement that I wrote, that she left me when I was just getting sober and needed her most. And I see through my fears how worthless and unloved and unwanted and abandoned that made me feel. And I look back at my own experience and I ask, well, how did I do that to her? And what I see is that, really, I abandoned her way before she abandoned me. Because near the end of my drinking, I was hanging out in bars and sometimes not coming home, sleeping in my office because drinking with buddies and not really caring that she was home alone, not knowing what was happening. I abandoned her way before she abandoned me. Right? And when I realized that, when that came off the end of my pen, something just flipped inside of me. Right? Flipped from perspective-wise. Just turned. Right? It changed me because I realized, I never intended to hurt her. Right? It's not something I ever was, I was just not thinking about her. Right? And when I realized how the things that I didn't like about Lori were the things that I find so objectionable about my own behavior. Right? And I couldn't do anything different. Right? And that leads me into the fourth column. It says, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Our own mistakes. That becomes an important phrase, especially with some people's inventories when they can't see what they've done. There's usually, even when somebody hasn't done anything, sometimes that's their mistake, right? Surrendering to being powerless and not doing what they were supposed to do, right? It says, where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Okay. All right, here we go. Welcome back. Hope you had a good lunch. Sorry, I was running a little late because downstairs restaurant was a little slow, but I got my salad I think it was 10 or 15 to 1. So I swallowed it and then... All right, so... at the... what we talked about before was the fourth column, and the next, there's 3 separate inventories for the fourth step. There's the resentment inventory, which we just looked at, and there's also a fear inventory and a sex inventory. Now, what it says on the bottom of 67 is, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. Right? The way I explained it, we've done that. Because it says, notice the word is bracketed, so it's like implies that you've already done it. And even in the chart on 65, it's brackets fear next to those things. So part of the fear inventory is already done. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. The way we looked at it, we put fear next to each of the 7 areas of self, or you could call them the 7 aspects of our life. Self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, pocketbook. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. Right? Everywhere I turned, everywhere I looked at things, there was some kind of fear behind that. And it set in trains of motion circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. Right? So, set in motion trains of circumstances. See, I had the fear, so when column 1 does column 2, right, the only way I could react is out of that fear that I already had. So I had the fear first, then the reaction, then the resentment, right, based on what they did. If I didn't have the fear, then when column 1 does column 2, I might have the thinking, but without the fear attached to it, I'd be neutral, right? Which is hopefully where we can get. It's not that situations aren't going to annoy me anymore, but if I'm not driven by the fears behind it, then column 1 does column 2, asshole, and then go on with my life or my day, right? I don't give it another thought. You know, being mad at someone isn't necessarily a resentment, right? Hanging on to that anger, resensing it every time you think about it is the thing that eats away at my gut. Right? But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? Right? I saw through the 4th column, right, that there was mistakes that I made. Right? Then relying on what I had been relying on, it couldn't have gone any other way. Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing, right? Because fear robs me of the life that I might have had if I didn't live by fear. Right? Because isn't it fear that pretty much controls all of your decisions? Right? It seems to cause more trouble. So we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. And we asked ourselves why we had them. So, for this part of the instruction, what I was shown was something that was really helpful. And it's hard to really... The results come out... The results are explainable in what the book says, but the way I do it... I can't necessarily say, well, the book says to do exactly this. But all I know is that it really, really impacted my life when I saw this. So I'm going to show you what I was shown. Okay. What I do is I have whatever amount of resentments we're talking about here. If I have 30 resentments, right, and 7 areas of self with a resentment next to each one, that's 30 times 7, 210. 210?
Yes.
All right. So that's a little bit more than 100 forms of fear, right? Right. So certainly there'll be duplicates, so maybe it'll go down to 100 forms or close to it, right? Which is kind of what the book says, right? 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. What I'd like to do is just pick some of the fears that come up.
Poverty?
Not good enough.
Not good enough.
Won't get what you want.
Okay.
Financial.
I'm kidding. What you want or what you deserve? Oops, I spelled that wrong. I can spell, really.
Unlovable.
Financial insecurity.
Financial.
Unlovable.
Not love. What else?
Financial insecurity.
Oh, okay.
That's something that's not
Financial insecurity.
C-U-R. Hurt.
Fear of failure.
Might use the word on the board.
Death.
You know what it is.
Death.
I'm sorry?
Death.
Yeah.
Illness. Health. Death. Health. What are you afraid of?
Okay. I think that this will be enough to start with. Okay. So basically what I do, I take all of the fears off of the inventories that I wrote, which I normally would have just taken the ones that I wrote, but you thought it wouldn't hurt to do the ones that you yelled out, so that's okay. But I'll take a piece of paper and I'll fold it in half, and then I'll fold it in half again to give you columns, right? And I'll take all of the fears off all of the third columns and all of the fourth columns, and I'll write them into the first column. So I'll have the one long list of fears, right? I don't have time to do that now, but let's start with financial insecurity. Why would I have the fear of financial insecurity? If I'm financially insecure, why would I have that fear?
Because you don't trust the people.
You don't have money.
I don't have money.
Thinking of the future, thinking into the future.
What about if I'm financially insecure, then I'll have no value? Could that be underneath it? Mm-hmm. I'll be worthless. Yeah. Right. Does that work for you?
Mm-hmm. If I got no money, I'll be useless.
Worthless.
Worthless. That's a given.
Okay. If I'm not loved, what would the fear be under not loved be?
Unlovable.
Unlovable. What about alone? If I'm not loved, I'll be alone. Right? That works?
Yeah.
Why would I fear death?
Unknown.
I have an idea where I go with this, but it isn't where everybody goes with it. What I get when I look at the fear, what's underneath the fear of death, is that I really don't know what that means. Because there is religions that would tell you that after death you get, virgins. Right? That's not necessarily my idea. The truth is I have no clue what that means. And with my agnostic behavior, I believe it means that I don't know what to expect, and the fear is to write it with less words. I just write the unknown. But what it means to me is I fear. I don't know that it's going to be, if it's going to be worse, and I don't know if it's going to be better, or I don't know if it's going to be nothing. I'm familiar with what I've got here, but I don't know what that's going to mean. Right? So I like just writing unknown. Does anybody have a different change? I don't know that I would put change next to fear, because we're looking for what's underneath
Are we
it.
talking still about fear? Okay, so you're looking at underneath. Yeah.
Unknown.
But the unknown is bad. There's something bad. Like the unknown is...
Not necessarily. It could be good, it could be bad. I don't know.
But I wouldn't be
but is
afraid of it being good.
right.
But if I'm afraid I'm going to hell, and that's what's in my head, then that's the unknown I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
There's something good.
Again, different people will have to write this differently on their own inventory. So you just have to pray about it and see what comes for you. Right. So, not good enough. Why would I fear not being good enough?
Failure.
Real feeling. I think that would kind of go the other way. If I fear being a failure, it would be because I'm not good enough. If I'm not good enough, that means maybe I'm worthless, right? Right? I have no value. So, worthless. But since we already have worthless there, since we already have worthless up there, I crossed that out. What about alone? Why would you fear being alone?
Not love. Not love.
What about emotional pain? I don't want to be alone because I don't like the way that feels. It hurts. So, emotional pain. All right. So normally I would have more columns to go across on. So what I'm going to do here is erase the first one. And this is a duplicate, so we're going to erase that. So why would I fear emotional pain? Oh, wait, did we...
Not getting what you want.
Why would I fear not getting what I want?
Causes discomfort.
Emotional pain again?
Unhappiness.
Unhappiness would be emotional pain, yeah? Emotional discomfort?
Yeah.
Right. So let's leave it with that. Just emotional pain. List is getting smaller. All right. So, again, why would I fear being alone? Emotional pain. So let's write that over here. From the microphone. Why would I fear being worthless?
Emotional pain. Because then I'll be alone for it.
If I feel worthless, I'd be alone, right? Or, which alone would translate into emotional pain, right? Right? Because we already saw that from before. And then why would I fear the unknown? So let's put that on top. Alone, emotional pain. Why would I fear being worthless? Did we do that already? No. If I'm worthless, I'll be alone. You won't want me. Right? So we already got that up there. So why would I fear the unknown? Remember, it was death, the unknown.
No God. No spirit.
Yeah. I fear dying because I don't know what that means, and my agnosticism tells me that there's nothing on the other side that's going to save me. Because there's no God. So, naturally, if you have 100 of these, and you get a couple more on there, but usually it comes down to, for me, when I do it, different people get some different stuff in there, but what it usually comes down to is alone, emotional pain. If I sit in emotional pain long enough, when I go through a big list, I end up with, these are at the bottom of my list. Alone, if I don't like being alone because I don't like the way that makes me feel, it's emotional pain. If I sit in emotional pain long enough, I could drink again. Right? And for me to drink is to die. And I don't know what dying means, so what I relate to is that I fear what I don't know about dying. Right? And the reason I fear what I don't know is because I don't believe that there's a God on the other side that's going to catch me. So, it says we asked ourselves why we had them. It says, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Right? So, because self-reliance fails me, and I continue to turn back to self-reliance over and over again, right? Because I doubt that there's a God that's going to help me. And that's where fear comes from. Fear comes from self-reliance failing me. Self-reliance was as good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When fear made us cocky, it was worse. Right? So, at the base of my agnosticism, there's the doubt that there really is a God that's going to help me. So I keep defaulting back into self-reliance. Right? And I have to see that underneath all of those fears is this fact that self-reliance fails me. Because if I relied on God, when I rely on God, right? When I rely on God, if I believed that there was a God on the other side of death that was going to catch me, I wouldn't be afraid of the unknown or dying. Right? If I relied on God, I know that I wouldn't drink. Right? If I relied on God, we talked about it in the bedevilments, right? That I wouldn't feel like I was alone, so I wouldn't suffer the emotional pain that comes from feeling alone, right? Because when you're in a fit spiritual place, you're fine when you're alone, right? So you could go all the way back up this list of fears, seeing that with a simple reliance on God, right, then the fears seem to dissipate. So it goes on to say, perhaps there's a better way. We think so. For we're now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We're in the world to play the role that He assigns. Remember, just before the fourth step, it talks about us being in the world playing God, and the inventory was full of examples of how we're in the world assigning roles to all these people that we had resentments to, that we just weren't playing their part right. They weren't playing the role I assigned them correctly. And here it says we're in the world to play the role that God assigns.
Excuse me.
The question?
You know how you tell people you can have your own idea of God and a higher power. It's like, well, not really. Like, you're saying God, like, not you, but it's always God. Well,
when you tell people you can have their own idea of God.
If it is God, you have. I just don't really understand that. Like, it's like you can have whatever higher power you want, but in the end, it still says God, which could.
Probably.
I don't know. As being agnostic as you were, what to you is then God, right? Like,
what's God?
You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
you're saying trust in
I've been asked
God,
that before. Yeah.
You don't, like, it says God. It's not higher power.
Yeah, I think what they're referring to, you have to keep it in context, is that they're not pushing a religion on you. That whatever sits right with you, as long as it makes sense. The reason I say is it refers to it has to make sense in here. In other words, I was told that if I don't believe in God, then I can just believe in the ocean. but I can't stop a wave, or that I could believe in a tree as a God. That doesn't make sense, because a tree can't keep me sober. A tree will not change the way I'm interacting with the world. So whatever you come to, nobody's here to tell you how to believe, but it's a journey you have to take on your own.
Doesn't the book say specifically that God is in our hearts? So why are we reaching out to outside things like the doorknob, the ocean, the mountain, your dog?
Right.
Why do we do that? Why do we hear people at meetings constantly bringing up that kind of stuff?
Good question.
Where is God?
I think it's got more to do with the group itself, because it wouldn't have flown in my home group.
Right.
Crosstalk's allowed in my home group, right? And if somebody said that, there'd be plenty of crosstalk. So we're going to talk more about that, and more about the things that are going to help you understand what the practice of leaning into the idea of God as we move through this. Let me look at the timing. Okay. So there's a sex inventory. I make a list of all of the relationships that I've had, love relationships that I've had. It actually talks about reviewed our sex conduct. This is not about, the sex inventory is not about what kind of sex you want, or how well you've done in the past, or how poorly you've done in the past with physically, right? This is about, again, my behavior in relationships, my conduct in relationships. One thing was obvious. There was one common denominator in all of my pages of sex inventory, is that I was in the relationship. Right? The other thing that was obvious was that there was certain behavior that was repeated, because there was a certain attitudes and belief systems and ideas about what that's supposed to mean and how that's supposed to look and what's okay and what's not okay. And right? So obviously, if I expect to have a new type of relationship other than continue to make the same mistakes over and over again, this becomes a really helpful process to look at. Not because I'm going to fix the way that I've lived in the past, right? Because what we're really looking at is, what are the things that keep coming up that I haven't been able to do differently? Right? Because it would be more like a self-help program if I was going to find the problems in my behavior and then stop doing them, right? I haven't been able to stop doing certain behaviors, and again, it's about this is a spiritual process, and I have to identify the things that I need to turn to God for help with. It says, what I like to do, I take one piece of paper, and if you download that 4-step guide sheets, there's a sex inventory sheet on there, and on one side is some basic questions, and they're not necessarily in the book, but it helps when you're fifth stepping to look at how did the relationship start, what were the specific situations that came up in the relationship, and how did it end, or how is it now? And it's better to be brief, because it's just so that the person listening to these questions have an idea of what's happening. And then there's some set questions here, and we ask these questions: where had I been selfish? Where had I been dishonest? Where had I been inconsiderate? Whom did I hurt? And I look around the relationship, not just at that person. Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy? Did we arouse suspicion? Did we arouse bitterness? Where were we at fault? And then this last question, I believe, is the most important. It's what should we have done instead? Now, I think it goes a long way to stress the fact that the wrong answer is should have not gotten involved in the first place. All right? Because you could have probably put that with every failed relationship. It's what should I have done instead in the relationship, because we're looking for our conduct. And it becomes really important after we've listed all of these things that we look at now from this place where we want to look at this to see really, because the idea here is to grow and to move towards being in a place where I can do better in future relationships. So I have to see where I fell short in the past to see where I need to turn to God for help with in the future. So what should I have done instead? Obviously, it was something I couldn't do. Right? And we got this all down on paper and looked at it. And in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for a future sex life. We subjected each relation to the test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. So, after I finished doing all the pages of sex inventory and get all this stuff down, I create a sex ideal. Again, it's not a list of what I don't make a list of what the future her should be. Right? What I make a list of is what do I need help with in my future relationships? What is the ideal Dan in a relationship? What do I need more power to become the person that I feel would be better in a relationship? So we take all of question 9s, all the question 9s, what should we have done instead? And I create a prayer starting off, God, in the future, please help me to be ... And I list the things in question 9 or adjust it to make it simple. The simpler I make it, the easier it'll be to say. And I keep that prayer. And I continue to ask God to help me live up to whatever my ideal turns out to be. Right? Again, it's because the hope is that we'll continue to grow and not just maintain sobriety, but to grow spiritually. And there's a difference between growing mentally and growing spiritually. Right? And there's a difference between seeking comfort and seeking God. We're going to talk about that more in 10 and 11 too. So at the end of each section, there's usually a summary, and it says, if we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill towards all men, even our enemies. For we look on them as sick people, because they're sick as I am. Because I see through that realization exercise that we do just before the 4th column. We have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. So, with that, check my timing real quick. Now comes when we're finished with all this stuff, and we're one of the instructions that I got just as I was done with my first inventory, which at that time there was a lot of obsessiveness and a lot of I don't know, I would just, well, in a it wasn't uncommon for people to have 500 or 1,000 names in the inventories. I'm glad that that's not the case anymore. We're not doing that anymore. I think we got to be realistic. Is it really a resentment? There's a difference between resentment and temporary anger. Is it, am I really still angry at this person? Right? Having these long lists for inventory in some ways can be just another way to validate my right to act like a victim. Right? We're looking for the things that are blocking us spiritually. Right? When I think about this person, does it still bother me? When I think about the situation, does it still bother me? Right? That's the things that we're trying to clear away. So we try to be realistic with it. It helps in a few different directions. One is when you have a lot of pages to write. Some people, I've seen people with so many pages to write on that they weren't able to finish it. Right? But if you stay on top of it with the person you're working with from the beginning and help them be realistic, the other part of that is you're not going to have to sit for so many hours listening to this stuff. Right? And they're not going to die from being realistic. If anything, it's going to be another exercise in reality. And it's like, are you really angry at this person, or are you just hanging on to the idea of being angry at this person? I don't tell them who to write on. I tell them to pray about it and make the list. Just try to be realistic about it. So then we get to the fifth step, where it says, this is the top paragraph of page 72. Having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? We have been trying to get a new attitude and a new relationship with our Creator, right? And to discover the obstacles in our path. Right? You can see that there's a shift between the third and the fourth column in the way that I'm looking at the resentment. And hopefully it's moved me enough that my attitude towards that person, usually I find, as I'm moving through this process, that the heat in these relationships seems to dissipate. And it becomes most obvious with my attitudes. And if I can get a new attitude towards them, towards the situation or towards the person, I can find a sense of freedom. Right? Somebody brought up a great question before, and how do you deal with someone that's hanging on to like some kind of abuse? Right? It's not always easy to get to work with someone who's attached to hanging on to something. Right? It's their spiritual path, it's not mine. I can suggest what they need to do to get free of it. Right? But some people just want to hang on to things so tightly. Right? But that wouldn't necessarily stop me from moving forward. Right? Because we'll talk about that in a minute as well. What we're looking for is a new attitude. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because I wrote inventory, I automatically have a new attitude. Right? But I have to acknowledge that my old attitude is what's continuing to separate me. Right? And in case I forget to come back to it, it would be addressed in the sixth step when we ask if we're still clinging to anything we're not willing to let go of. Right? Because that would pop up again in that question.